Good night, ladies and gentlemen. It's pretty late in the night, so I don't want to take too many people's time. Let me start off with Psalms 137, verse 2. Don't be envious of workers of iniquity, for they soon shall be cut down like grass and wither as the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, so you shall dwell in the land, and verily you shall be fed. I mean, it's basic. If you abide in goodness, man, it's the best way to go. You know what I mean? So I don't need to go into much more detail on that. The Release the Snyder Cut movement is a movement of for purpose, and it's a very good movement. It sparked other movements like Rehire James Gunn. People are becoming vocal, and this movement was very vocal online just up to recently. But first, let me just show you the results of this poll, which said if the Snyder Cut was to come out and released digitally, and the majority of people, only 34 votes, but the majority of people said they would get it immediately. It's a very small poll, but it's still cool to see I saw the proportional desire for such a cut. Now, this here is actually on Twitter, and this guy, Mehdi, also known as Deuce La Machina, he was pretty bored, so he put together a couple polls, and these polls are still active. The first one was to do with which is the best DCU movie between these four. He left out BVS. Then his next poll said, do you think WB will eventually release the Snyder Cut? After that, he has, if they do, when do you think they will release it? Would you trade the actual DCEU for Snyder's first 5 movies of the Superman saga? And how would you want the Snyder Cut to be released? Do you still support the DCU, or do you boycott the new movies because of what WB did? Very interesting what these polls will show. Not a lot of people voted, though. This is a bit random, but what movie between these four would you want the most in the DCEU? If you could bring only one of these 4 directors in the DCU, who would you pick? Between these 4, they add up those guys as well. He says, the best DCEU score soundtrack. Sorry, Mr. Only One Batman theme. You're not qualified. He said, which one of these which one of these DCEU movies had the best soundtrack? And then Mehdi said, who should supervise DC films? That was very interesting. You can check out Mehdi on Twitter, and you can check out his poll. It's dated the 30th of August, which is today, almost the end of today. All right. Which leads us to something that very interestingly happened on DC Universe Live Chat. Some Zack Snyder fans swarmed to that and asked some questions. Of course, comicbookmovie.com was quite sarcastic about it, still doubting the Snyder Cut. What was very interesting is that they were actually asking Kevin Smith, while they were launching this DC Universe, this streaming service, they were asking Kevin Smith to speak on the release of Snyder Cut. And here you can see some of their comments here. Peter Mueller, come on, Kevin, hashtag release the Snyder Cut, you want it too. And then these people from Brazil, and then the DMO video says hashtag release the Snyder Cut. Kata says release the Snyder Cut. Grobo Joke says hashtag release the Snyder Cut. Tyler Manning says, Snyder fans, please shut up. I like Snyder too, but y'all are getting annoying. Silly Matter says, don't understand why some people want to suppress others from their support of releasing a director's complete movie. What's the point of putting people down when it doesn't affect you? Hashtag release the Snyder Cut. So they just kept on going at it. And I thought that was interesting that was actually broadcast. Here's another Snyder fan. Issa Dabo Nyang. or Issa King 90, and he said, when I see these three heroes, the first thing I think of is Batman v Superman, which is really cool. That's when they first were featured together. So again, these are all very positive things, I think, in my opinion. All right, you can always leave your comments here. It's pretty late in the night, so some of you guys will not be chatting at this present time, and that's okay by me. Let me get to the other set of stuff I want to show you guys. So here is the updated poll that I already showed you guys. And I just want to discuss one more thing, which has to do with what's called My World. And it's interesting that that theme comes over and over again in Batman v Superman. I thought it was really cool. Batman v Superman was a very interesting movie. So let's just run through that. So some of the things, you know, again, a credit to Chris Terrio for the clever writing. When Lois was talking to Clark, she said, you know, the symbol, which is on his chest, which is from the House of L, she said, this means something. And Clark responds, it did on my world. My world doesn't exist anymore. And this is interesting because Clark is speaking to Lois in the context of Kal-El. So as much as Lois would call him Clark, when he's claiming my world, he's claiming the Kryptonian arm of himself, the Kryptonian heritage. It's extinct now, but the my world, which Zod was fighting for, and also is Clark's world, though he wasn't raised as a Kryptonian, it's his heritage. And I thought this was very interesting that he speaks about his heritage and the fact that he uses his heritage, actually, and the House of Hell and his world to show that that hope for Krypton to move forward, while he embodies that, he somehow misses the point that even though Krypton died, the hope is now held in his hand. But anyway, he said that hope was on his world, but his world doesn't exist anymore. I don't think he's saying the hope doesn't exist anymore, but clearly he's from that world. But I think he's saying that look what that hope got his world, which is very interesting. Now, why he would say that is because, of course, in him trying to execute that hope, a very tragic incident happened, which is why he said what he said to Lois. Now, some people said it was poor writing and so on because, of course, they felt really bad when Superman said that to Lois Lane. It seemed almost as if Superman was hopeless at the time. He was not saying he was hopeless, but he was saying that the symbol didn't stop that world he lived in, which the people, you know, who lived that symbol of hope, the House of L, they were all destroyed except for him. Of course, he obviously was the sole survivor who was the hope for Krypton. He actually is supposed to embody that, but apparently he lost sight of that for a minute. And that's okay because he's trying to instill hope in mankind and it doesn't seem to be working out quite well, right? So I can understand why he would be at that point questioning that. And so I just thought it was very interesting to give this little dialogue to you guys, because the whole purpose behind this video, of course, is to clarify some misunderstandings of Batman v Superman. But the important thing is he embraces Krypton as his world. He calls it my world. And this is highlighted very nicely in BVS. You know, it was the foundation of it was set in Man of Steel, where Jor-El talks to him about being, you know, the child of two worlds. And because of that, he has the benefit of being able to inspire mankind so that they don't go down the road of Krypton, which I thought was very interesting. Now, whereas Superman seemed hopeless in that particular scene, and he used Krypton, which was a dying world, to express hopelessness, here in this scene with Jonathan Kent, and Jonathan Kent, I can't give Jonathan Kent more credit. There's so much credit to give Jonathan Kent. You can't give him enough credit, because if there was no Jonathan Kent in this particular saga, in this particular trilogy, there'd be no Superman. Okay, I've said this in the video before, that if Superman had landed on Earth and ended up with, you know, in the possession of Lex Luthor's father or anybody else, maybe people from the city, he wouldn't be a Superman with values. Jonathan Kent is, to the T, to the letter, Clark follows. He follows Jonathan Kent to the T. And so it was not strange when the ghost of Jonathan Kent pops up and Superman's having a discussion with Jonathan Kent that his hope is restored. His hope was shaky, it was almost lost, and it was restored. And it's very interesting what Jonathan Kent had to say. So Superman was saying, did the nightmares continue? Did the nightmares ever stop? And Jonathan Kent said to him, because Jonathan was talking about a similar situation to what Clark Kent had just gone through. Clark Kent was trying to do good, and it ended up something worse happened, right? And this is the thing that Clark couldn't deal with. He couldn't deal with the fact that he'd failed to inspire. He had all these good intentions, and he just couldn't save the people. And therefore, because he couldn't save the people, he was giving up hope. And it's interesting. There was a cartoon I showed you guys, a cartoon where Clark was sitting on his father's bed, a comic, and this guy, I forgot what his name is, on Twitter was, showing that was an example of why, the classic Park Camp is different to this Park Camp. It's so interesting that scenario where, again, Clark feels he can save the whole world, but he can't save his father, that powerlessness is the same thing that Clark feels in BVS, the powerlessness to stop these disasters. And so here he is now reflecting on this with his ghost father, and his ghost father talks about a similar situation where his ghost father intends, he has good intentions, but it turns out to be horrific, right? And so Clark was saying, well, when did the nightmares ever stop? Did they stop? And he said, yes. And he said, when I met your mother, she gave me faith that there was good in this world. She was my world. And that's beautiful because there are two things. That's a parallel as well to the comics where Martha Kent is sort of like Jonathan's anchor, all right? But also, more importantly, now my world is depicted in the form of a person. My world has become personalized. It has become intimate. And the point that he's making with Martha, which we saw in Man of Steel, where she said, you heard little Clark say, the world's too big, Mom. She said, well, then make it small, right? And focus on the sound of my voice. She was able to allow Clark's world to become her world, her focusing of him. She helped him to focus his world so that my world became smaller. And it's very interesting that that's the same thing the effect she had on Jonathan Kent. He was able to see there was good in this world, and by focusing on his wife and the attributes and the virtues she had, and seeing that she was good, and that, you don't have to be fatalistic and someone who is narcissistic about the world, that, if you do something good, it just turn out to be more evil. He got back his faith that there's good in this world. So he stopped being narcissistic, and she was able to help him get back to that guy with the values and morals, and still pursue trying to do good things in the world. That's why he said she was his world. She was like his anchor, right? Grounding him to the good in the world and giving him back that hope. And that's the hope that he saw in Superman, in Clark. And he was able to visualize what Clark would become, even though he wasn't sure that would happen. And now we see the ghost of him talking to Clark, and it's beautiful. And what's interesting is, of course, it's not really a ghost, it's really Clark reflecting. But nonetheless, what's interesting is that is what Clark takes with him here. And you hear him repeat his father's words in the context of his father's world. But he does it in two ways. So I'll explain to you. The first thing he says is, this is my world. Then he says to Lewis, you might not be able to see this reflection here, but his face is turning here, and Lewis's face is watching him here. But anyway, he says, you are my world. And he reflects what his father did. In other words, you show me that there's good in this world. And because of you, and because of my love for you, I'm anchored to this world, and I'm doing this for you, Lewis. Right? And it's a beautiful comeback on what Jonathan Kent taught him up on that mountain. And she was the one, again, who believed that he was the symbol of hope. She could see the virtues in him. And so he gave it back to her. He said, you know what? I'm going to do this because for you. because you need the protection because you are good in this world. She's actually the superwoman to Superman. It's just crazy how this gets deeper. But there's another point, and so we have to go back to it. When faced with Doomsday, this is crazy. So I'm gonna try and get it done properly. When faced with Doomsday and Superman pushed him into, the tanks, it exploded, and he absorbed the energy. Wonder Woman realized what was happening, and she was like, "This thing, it absorbs energy." Superman says, "This thing is from another world, my world." And now Superman clearly distinguishes the difference between Earth and Krypton. He calls it another world. And then he claims it as his own, my world. It's an extinct world, but nonetheless, he claims it as his world. I thought it was very interesting because Doomsday is this particular Doomsday. It's not the original Doomsday, and we all know that. But this particular Doomsday was created from General Zod, who's a Kryptonian, but also from Lex Luthor, who's a human. In other words, strange as it may sound, this is the twisting and abomination of what Jor-El said to Clark in Man of Steel, where Jor-El said to Clark, "You are a child of two worlds." Well, General Zod now becomes Doomsday because his Lex Luthor's blood is mixed with General Zod's DNA. And what's so crazy about this is Doomsday is a child of two worlds as well. He's a child of the villainy of Lex Luthor and General Zod. So he's Kryptonian human as well. It's crazy, huh? And so I found that very interesting. And the other thing that's very interesting here is the both times we saw Clark speak about my world, it was referring to Krypton before the final finale. And here Clark adds yet another dimension to my world. He says, "This is my world," this time claiming Earth as my world. But he doesn't just say my world. He says, "This is my world." In other words, this is the actual world that I have owned and accepted as my own. The other one was extinct. And then he turns and he now personalizes it like his father, Jonathan Kent, did. And he says, "You are my world." Now, let's look at how interesting this is. And Chris Terrio is just playing on words here, but it's beautiful. Here he said, "Give me faith that there is good in this world." This world, right? This world. Now check this out. Superman now says this. He doesn't just say this world. He claims this world as his world. This is my world. He takes it another level. So he takes it further from what Jonathan Kent did. Jonathan Kent talked about this world, okay? But he claimed Martha as his world, his anchor. Superman, or Kal-El Clark Kent, says, "This is my world." He's speaking as Clark Kent, actually. So he claims the world as his own, and then he makes it small by saying, "This, you are my world, and you anchor me to this." I thought that was really awesome. And the other thing about my world throughout this entire thing, which I think is just really awesome, is the fact that we can claim the world in this movie as my world as well. And it was I forgot what your name is, sir, but you were the one that actually did that nice illustration, and you're a subscriber on my channel. Let me see if I can find out what your name is. Hold on a second. Hold on a second, folks. I will get it. Let me just come out of this for a minute. Okay, hold on a second. Oh, these are just some quick updates here. Let's see his name in a second. Just another people responding to a post that I put up on Twitter. Wow, can't believe there's so much conversation going on here. But just hold on a second, guys. Just hold on a second. I'll get to him. I'll get his name. Royal Wakefield. Royal Wakefield made this point, which I thought was just excellent. To the point about my world being the world in BVS being my world, because he showed that you know, Lewis Lane and Jonathan Kent with Martha Kent, you know, how they were their worlds, right? How important they were to them. And he made a statement which made me respond by saying, "Yeah, and that's my world as well." You know, and that's it. I think that is such subtle playing on words there, and I think is just really awesome for us to actually talk about. So I think that's about it. That's all I got to say for tonight. I see there's not much people in the chat. Oh, okay, we have 3 viewers. I didn't know that, but you know, I didn't see a whole lot of people in the chat section, so I didn't want to. Um, I didn't want to, you know, go on too long. But if you guys are in the chat section right now, that's all really awesome. Shout out to each and every one of you guys out there. But this is basically what I'm going to bring to the table, which is the polls and also the interesting discussion on my world and how far that can go. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. You can always leave your comments down below concerning that. And I hope you guys have a good night, man. Have a good night. I just kind of had to do this video because my stomach was still giving me trouble. Anyway, man, I hope you guys have a blessed one. Catch you later.